Hello, world. It says you're live.
Hello.
It says you're live. Hi. Hi,
We are
John.
live.
Willpower doesn't work. What? It's true.
It is true. This is going to be a fun conversation, I think.
This will be fascinating.
You're going to have to talk me down off the soapbox, Joe, if I get going.
Okay, so this is a 2-hour episode, and we haven't started yet.
Well, I can't.
That's what that tells me.
I got soccer practice, so.
Okay, what time do we have to be done recording? Maybe I should ask that question.
As close to 4 as possible would be great.
Okay. So we need to shoot for 10 till 4, because we won't make it.
It'll be okay. It'll be okay. I got to leave by 4:30. I'm basically ready.
You're basically ready. Hi, Carol. Nice Twisby,
All
by the
my
way.
stuff's together.
What is the Twisby? I didn't recognize it, but I also didn't get a chance to look very closely at it.
It's the new. It's not the Twisby Go. It's the new spring-loaded one that broke Brad's brain.
Okay.
You got to go listen to that episode of The Pen Addict. I forget what it's called, but it's their first cartridge converter one.
Okay. Oh, that's right. They don't do cartridges. I forget that.
They do this one, and it has a spring, which apparently is in there to absorb shock if you drop it, so the cartridge doesn't come out. The swipe, that's it.
Got it.
Yes.
The swipe. Interesting. The Twisby swipe. Gonna have to get my...
I want to get one of those. I did not get a Twisby swipe, but I did get one of these.
What is this?
Hold on. I got to get my autofocus. This is going to be impossible to see. This is a Franklin Christoph, kind of, Model 40, which they don't make very often.
Okay.
And it is a green diamond cast.
Okay.
With a needlepoint nib. So it's kind of a bigger pen, twist cap. That's kind of what it looks like.
Nice.
It does post, but
you're gonna have action items today that require the use of this pen.
I was given a gift card.
Gift cards for the win. Good job,
no
gift
joke.
cards. All right. Well, should we do this since you got to go? For those who are here,
we'll be good. Don't worry about it too much.
Button.
Just don't. Yeah. We just can't take a half-hour break in the middle. That's all.
All right. All right. Got my book set aside. Got my...
1 second. I'm going to, before we start, I had a question for Rachel.
Oh, yeah. Somebody liked the stream. I forget that one, too. I always think, like, please subscribe. But actually, liking is, for us at least, I mean, both are helpful, but liking does help in the moment to get people to, like, gets it into the recommended lists a little more frequently. It's all an algorithm play game. Have you realized that? Like,
yep.
So many of the streams, at least the reputable folks, will say that. It's like, hey, please like and subscribe. That way other people can find this. Like, it's not about you actually liking the video or liking the stream. It's to help us get it to other people.
It's about creating an environment where people can find the podcast.
It's true.
Which episode is this? 125?
125.
My goodness, we have read 124 books. Well, ish. We had a couple of special episodes, I guess, but that's impressive.
That's a lot of books.
Do you feel smarter?
Nope, definitely dumber. My environment hasn't changed. It helps you find the videos later, like liking them? Really? That's interesting.
Suppose.
Fascinating. All right.
We got the notes there. We got audio hijack there. Mind map there. Chat there. I think we're good.
You should try doing this with 3 computers.
That sounds horrible. 1
light, 2 light, screen. So there's 5 screens here plus a camera. 2 cameras actually running.
I think I'll let Joe worry about all that stuff.
Great fun. A like list in your history. I didn't know that. I'm not a video liker. I'm terrible. I ask other people to like the videos and then I don't.
Despicable.
I know, it's terrible. All right, tell me when to hit the
That
button.
one's armed. That one's armed. Okay. I think we're good.
Okay.
Actually, you know what?
No,
I'm gonna
I
grab this screenshot and then just post it in the chat because I want to talk about this real quick.
don't. The Obsidian thing.
Actually, no. I'll save that. I'll save that for later. All right. I think we're good. Ready? 3, 2, 1. All right, so I have a little bit of self-promotion, if you don't mind, real quick here, Joe Bulig.
Okay, ready, set,
Because
go.
as we record this, it is the eve of the launch of the video course, which has been my obsession for these many months, and that is To Obsidian and Beyond over at the Sweet Setup. I absolutely love this app. I'm sharing with you some cool stuff I figured out even today before we hit record. And there's always a launch week discount, as with all Sweet Setup courses.
Yep.
So we talk about it a lot on this show. Wanted to make sure people knew about it. Sweetsetup.com/Obsidian. If you are interested in it, it includes the Zero to Obsidian workshop replay that I did previously. Plus, I think there's like 46 different videos, and I keep finding new stuff and I keep adding things to it. So this is definitely not one of those ones where you just throw it out there and then you never think about it again. This is going to grow over time because I just can't help myself.
Sure, sure. I get a kick out of this so much because you were on such the Rome train here for quite, like, you were hardcore. It's like, I got to get you off of Rome. Like, we got to get you onto Obsidian, and now you're like hardcore Obsidian. I love this.
So it's kind of your fault, I guess.
I don't know what it's not 100% my fault. I know that one for sure.
It's partially your fault, partially Nick Milo. I'm doing a lighthouse session with him as we record this. It's tomorrow. So by the time the episode goes out, it will have happened already. But I shared with you, I'm a little bit terrified to be doing that one because I still think I'm kind of an Obsidian poser and I'm not that confident in my abilities with the app. Like I kind of feel the stuff that I do is cool for me, but like no one else really cares. I feel like everyone's going to go, follow Federico Vitici if they really want to know what's going on with Obsidian.
Right. Sure. Sure.
But it's cool. Nick is a very thoughtful guy, and I am excited to be in those sessions he's had. Eleanor, I forget her last name, but she's the one who does Obsidian Roundup on there. David Sparks is going to be on there. A couple other people. David's doing a lot of cool stuff with Obsidian too. But yeah, I'm just trying to share what I learned. It's fascinating, like how you can build this into whatever you want it to do. I mean, just before we hopped on, I was screen sharing. I added something to my personal retreat stuff, which I think is going to come up in the course of the episode because we can talk about environment disconnection, stuff like that. But anyways, there's the self-promotion segment of Bookworm. So thanks for giving me a moment to do that.
Good work. You did well.
Let's jump in. Thank you. Let's jump into follow-up here. Did you print your summary and put it in front of your computer?
Not 100%. And this is because, well, I guess technically, so I did print it twice, but I haven't been happy with what I've got in the layout. So if you go to, oh shoot, what is the link? Let me get you the link here. If you go to liminalthinking.com, so this is based on Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray, in the top, he's got a menu bar that has principles and practices, and he has these listed there, which makes it very easy to copy paste and get it into a document, and then you can do all the formatting and such that you want. But I really want this to be on one page, but it's a lot of text and makes it hard to read. So I either need to like make it on a really big piece of paper or figure out how to format this differently. So I've tried a couple iterations and don't like either one. So technically I have printed a summary and I have put it in front of my computer, but I still don't like it. So I'm trying a third round. I don't know what it's going to become. So I'm still working on it technically. So it depends on how far down the technicalities you want to go here.
So do you consider it done or not? I guess is
I so we
my
didn't really
technical
so
criteria
many
here.
of these are like, okay, we haven't officially decided what done is on these. And in my head, it was just, oh yeah, print it and stick it up on the wall. Like, well, no, it's turned into way more than just print it and stick it on a wall. So it doesn't work that well when we didn't decide, should I be done trying to get it formatted correctly or should I have at least started it? I think in this case, it should probably be done, in which case it's not done, if that made sense.
Sure. So if you're not willing to check the box, then I'm good with that. I'll
Yeah.
join you in not checking
Okay.
boxes because I had two here of identifying limiting beliefs from others and making a list of my governing beliefs. Uh, I have been cranking on this Obsidian course, and I still intend to make both of these lists inside of Obsidian, but it hasn't happened yet. If I can get through tomorrow, then I will be able to think again. And yeah, so I guess maybe we can keep those on for next time. I do think there's a
Sure.
lot of value in those. I've been talking about these limiting beliefs and these governing beliefs, and I have an idea of some of these. I just don't have them in a list form like I was
Sure.
intending to make inside of Obsidian. So not done.
All right. So you got some work to do. I got some work to do. At least we know how
Yeah,
our action items for next time are going to start.
I might have some more work to do after this book.
Yeah,
So
there's that.
so let's jump in here. Today's book is Willpower Doesn't Work by Benjamin Hardy. And this I picked kind of because of the clickbaity title. It's obviously taking a stance against willpower, which has been kind of a trendy productivity topic for the last several years. A lot of research about how you need to conserve your willpower, lots of stories about like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and Oprah and all those really, really successful people, how they wear the same thing every day so they conserve their mental resources and they have the willpower for the things that really matter. And this book is basically just saying like all that is a bunch of baloney. It's all about the environment. So I didn't really know what to expect going into this. I kind of expected he would take a strong stance and then not back it up very well with arguments. I think he did a pretty decent job. We'll get into the specifics here, but it is your standard 3-part productivity book. Although the flow of these parts was a little bit different. Did you catch that, or is that just something that I felt was a little bit different?
I can't say I noticed that there was a different flow in it because there was the parts and then
Okay,
chapters within those parts. I mean, there's a summary at the end of the chapters. Is it chapters or
sure.
parts? I forget what. There's a summary at the end, and now I'm blanking on whether
Summary
it
at the end of
was.
the chapters. Yep.
Yeah. So I can't say that I noticed there was a difference in flow. Maybe I just missed it.
Okay. Well, most of the 3-part books specifically is like part one is the biggest one. That's like half of the book. And this is everything you need to know about the topic. And then part two is like, here's how it applies to you. And then part three is usually like, here's how it applies to the future. If I were going to make
Sure.
a template for how to write a productivity book, that would be it.
Yep. That's
And
pretty
part
much how it
three
goes.
is, yeah, and part three is always the smallest section. It's kind of just like the last thing he wants to say, so it sticks in your brain as you close it and you move on to the next thing. And this one I felt was a little bit different. Part one is your environment shapes you. Part two, how to make willpower irrelevant. And then part three, outsource high performance and success to your environment. But what's different about this, in my opinion, is that part three is the biggest one. And that's where a lot of the gold nuggets are. That's where the stuff that really matters is. Um, I feel like that's a little bit different than at least several of the last books that we've read that have been kind of broken up into these three different parts. And I felt like that was a little bit refreshing. You know, I was kind of surprised when I was going into part three because it felt like it was coming pretty early in the book. And I kind of had a thought when I got there, I hope this doesn't just become monotonous and repetitive. And by the end, I just wish it was a lot shorter. And I can't say I ever got to that point. So I feel like he took a chance with the format of this book, but it paid off because the whole part 3 he was able to hold my attention, and I felt like the chapters kind of tied together well.
It's interesting to me that you think that part 3 is where all the nuggets were, because I thought that was part 2.
Sure.
This is total, and this is going to play right into the topic of the books. Like, I feel like my background has set me up such that part 2 is probably where I feel like a lot of the gold is on this. There's a lot of gold in 3, but I felt like I got the most out of part 2 versus 3. And yet
Sure.
you feel like part 3 is where most of it is, unless I'm putting
I
words in your mouth, but that's what it sounds like.
I feel like part 3 is where most people who are going to read this are going to find the most value. I think the way part 2 is written, that's the one that appeals to me the most, and I'm not surprised that it appealed to you the most either.
Sure.
But we just came off of liminal thinking where
Yeah. Yeah, there's that.
basically go find the other things, how to make willpower irrelevant. This is kind of high level stuff still. And you can find individual things in here. I do have an action item or two from this section as well. But I do think that part 3 is where you would, for lack of a better term, find the tactics, the more actionable stuff, where you read through one of these chapters and you're like, oh, that's the one that I've been missing. Because a lot of this is talking about your environment and things that you can do to make an environment where you can be more productive and achieve your goals faster. I mean, it sounds kind of sleazy when you say it that way, but it doesn't. He does a better job of saying it than that. It doesn't feel like snake oil salesman. That's one of the common complaints I hear about productivity books. It's like, oh, these are all just snake oil salesmen, and I understand why people feel that way. I didn't feel that way about this guy, but everything leading into it, that's kind of what I was expecting.
Sure. I really thought I was going to get a book where it was going to like sidestep the conversation around what is willpower and how does it work and here's why it doesn't work. I thought it was going to be one of these total clickbait titles scenarios, and I don't feel like I got that. I don't feel like this was a bait and switch scenario. I feel like he lived up to the title of the book in this case. So it feels solid to me from a gut reaction at the very beginning of this.
It does. And that's why I think it's important to have this conversation at the beginning, because if you just look at this book, you're probably like, no.
Yep. Even here's a good indicator. All right. So this book was sitting on one of the end tables by our sectional in the living room of the apartment last night. And my mother-in-law had I was gone last week doing a bunch of work on the house, and our girls were down for what we affectionately call G Camp, Grandma and Grandpa Camp for the week. Well, Grandma brought them home yesterday, and then my mother-in-law spent the night with us, and she left this morning. Anyway, she saw this book on the end table in the living room. She's like, willpower doesn't work. Well, that's not true. Willpower does wonders. It's like, okay, this will be a fun conversation. And started like, okay, why do you think that? And just had it was about a 30-minute conversation there around a lot of her history in making big decisions, things like stopping smoking and how it happened. She's like, I totally used willpower to stop smoking. It's like, okay, well, talk to me about how you came to the decision to stop smoking. Well, she was dating now her husband, and they decided they wanted to stop smoking together, so they made a pact that whoever smoked a cigarette first had to buy a steak dinner for the other person, and that was the pact. It's like, you totally changed your environment. That wasn't willpower. You totally changed the circumstances around the situation. And she just kind of looked at me like, oh, I suppose you're right. It's like, any other examples? And she gave me 2 or 3 more. It's like, same thing. Every time it was environment changing, not willpower. And time it was done, she's like, oh, okay. I guess maybe I could get on board with that, but that's completely different than what I've thought in the past. So this is a thing. Like, it totally feels clickbaity, but whenever you start getting into it, which we'll do here, and it seems to stand just from what I can tell.
Yeah, that's a great place to jump into this first section, I think. So I have this broken up in the outline by parts. There's a lot of different chapters, but I don't want to go through each chapter individually. I just want to grab a couple key ideas from each of these parts. So part one is your environment shapes you. And in the first chapter in part one, talks about there are two different worldviews. One is extreme individualism, which is I have free will, I make my own decisions, willpower works, etc. And then there is complete determinism, where everything is decided ahead of time and I'm just a victim of my environment. And he basically says the truth is somewhere in the middle. So willpower doesn't work is a little bit of a clickbaity title because I don't think he's saying it doesn't exist, but he is saying that it only accounts for part of the formula and you have to recognize that your environment is going to contribute more to the other part. This particular point, by the way, this resonated with me because of my Christian background. There are two very different theological camps. One is Calvinism, where everything is decided ahead of time, and the other one is Arminianism, I believe. And so right away when he's like two worldviews, extreme individualism, complete determinism, like, oh yeah, of course. Just like the church.
Predestination, yes. Oh, tulip. Gotta love it.
Yeah.
And that's going deep into church history and theology
That's as far
backgrounds
as
and
we're
such.
gonna go.
That's deep.
Yeah. Just saying that, like, I have thought about this particular topic before,
Yep.
which I think kind of primed me for his argument at this point in the book.
I think it is interesting, like this whole concept of, the misnomer here of willpower doesn't even exist. Well, it does, but he's just not saying it's the end all be all that the productivity self-help world says it is. That's essentially what he's getting at. At least that was my take on it. And in this particular, in the beginning, especially at this first part, individualism and determinism, which that's not the name of the chapter, but that's one of the topics within those first couple chapters. And whenever you start looking at it, like, oh, okay, well, if I admit that I can change my environment, if I have this individualism mindset here, if I recognize that I can change that, you still have to have some form of, like, a very small piece of willpower to change that environment. Like, if you're going to say that your environment is the key indicator here and not willpower, then you still have to make the change. You got to have some form of motivation or willpower to make that change so that the change you're actually after can happen. So there has to be something at the beginning. That's the one piece here that I don't feel like was talked about a ton. Maybe I just missed it, but there does have to be at least a small piece of that at the beginning of the chain here.
You're right. He does get a little bit into that in chapter 2. He talks about when you're in a bad environment, you only have two choices. You either conform to the bad environment, that's the default, or you battle your environment through willpower, which is not ideal. So the whole book is trying to enable you and give you the authority and the power to change your own environment instead of just continue to stay somewhere where it's doing you harm. At the end of chapter 1, he talks about this coming of age moment, which I know this is going to tick some people off when they read this. He says the coming of age moment. So, like, when you become an adult, right? That is when you take responsibility for changing your own environment. So he's not mincing any words here. He's not beating around the bush. He's basically saying, look, if you're not willing to take responsibility for changing your own environment, we're basically done here.
Yes. Yeah. Which is probably good, because the rest of the book, you're just going to be mad at him if you don't admit that piece at the very beginning here. So, yes, take ownership. But we've talked about this before, self-responsibility. Like,
Yes.
please do this. Though at this point, I would imagine that if you haven't at least acknowledged that that's a thing you should do, you're probably not listening to Bookworm anymore at this point. So there's that.
Yeah. Also, with taking responsibility for your environment, this goes beyond your immediate environment. The second thing I jotted down for the outline here is this negative secondary connections. I found this idea pretty fascinating. where if you have a friend who has a friend who is getting into some stuff that you would consider bad, then it's going to have a negative impact on you, even though you don't spend any time with that other person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is the whole guilty by association concept.
Yeah. So he even mentions in this book that belief that I don't know where it originates from, but you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. But actually, you're the average of the people that the 5 people you spend the most time with spend the most time with, because they're bringing in all of those influences into your circle of safety, to borrow a Simon Sinek term. And that's having an impact on you whether you realize it or not. So if you have a friend of a friend who is gaining weight, then you are more likely to gain weight. And he's got science and research and numbers to back that up, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. I don't want to admit that my well being is at the whims of people who I don't even really see day to day. But I think it's important to recognize all of those little factors that do make an impact in your environment.
It's so true. And one of the ways, and this is something I've been working on a little bit here recently. The easy one here is fitness. Like this is always going to be the easy example. It's more universal than many, many others. But I recently started playing basketball with a group of guys early on Thursday mornings when I can. And
Nice.
it's fun, but the the guy who heads the whole thing up was a bit tentative in asking me because I'm the tech guy and he knows I grew up on a farm and I I don't usually come across as somebody who's super athletic. Like that's not something that people assume about me at all. But I made all-star teams in basketball in high school. Like that was my sport. So whenever I talked to who was I talking to? I was talking to my wife, and she was talking to his wife, and they found out that Joe used to play basketball in high school. Anyway, long story short, he asked because they're super super competitive. Like a lot of the guys who played in college, and they played on the varsity team in college and such. So they're good. And they're a bit younger than me, even. So it's a challenge to keep up with these guys. And that has pushed me to very different levels in basketball than what I did even in high school. So I feel like I've upped that significantly. And in the whole fitness realm, I've now been doing things I haven't done in years. So that's a very positive thing. So this is definitely like that whole who you hang out with thing can change. Partially because, like in this scenario, that group of guys, they're all dads. Everybody's dads. Everybody's got some form of a white collar job of some kind. So it's a very interesting group, but I feel like it's a group that, we can keep each other accountable and help each other grow that whole average concept there. So I don't know. It's something I've been working on lately.
Do you feel that they are better than you?
Yes, it's very obvious.
Okay. Okay. I just asked because that's one of the specific things he says to look for in part 3 is whatever skill you're trying to become better at, go compete with people who are way better than you are.
Yep. Yep.
Because you'll learn a lot just from being with them and watching their mannerisms, because you don't want to be embarrassed. So you'll figure out a
Right.
way to keep up,
Yep.
which I think is a pretty fascinating concept, but I couldn't think of anything personally where like I would want to put myself in that environment. Sounds like you already did that. That's
Yeah.
pretty great.
I've done it there. And then, the thing that's been on the forefront of my mind is, remodeling a house in the span of 3 months, tearing it down to studs and rafters and bringing it all the way back in 3 months. That's what I'm in the middle of right now, which means I've been hanging around a lot of people who are DIYers and contractors and engineers and inspectors and permit people and all sorts of folks, which is a very interesting crowd that I've now found myself neck deep in. So anyway, a lot has changed in Joe's world and in my environment. So this has all been like very interesting to me given the stage that I'm in the middle of right now.
So if you can't find Joe, go look at a Home Depot.
That's not far off. Home Depot, Menards, the local home outlet. Like, these are the places. This past week, when I took the week off and worked on the house, I was in Home Depot or Menards at least once, if not twice a day. So that's the way it goes.
Nice. Cool. Well, I think that I don't have an action item associated with this because I think I've kind of already pruned my social circles as much as I feel comfortable. But that would be a very obvious action item from reading this would be to take stock of the people who are speaking into your life and making sure that you're okay with the effect that they're having. If you're not, then figure out what connections you need to break off. And that's never easy. It's never comfortable, but I think he's making a very strong case here at the beginning that it is important, especially if you want to change your situation, which he's got a cool personal story of how he did that. He gets into a lot of the details in the at the very end in the conclusion part of the book, but he kind of alludes to it over and over throughout here. But there's been different tipping points in his life where he's been under a considerable amount of positive stress, he calls it. He makes the difference between eustress and distress and using those as a launch pad, to go up to a new level in his life in a specific area, which kind of gets into the last part of this I wanted to talk about was the environments and stress. Because he says we need two different types of environments. And I think we know this analytically because we've read Flow by Mihaly.
Yeah.
Because that's all about being in a stressful environment, but not one that is beyond your capability. And then you're able to get a lot done and you're in the zone, you're flowing. And then when you're done, you step out of the zone. And so there's high stress where you're functioning at peak capacity, but then there is a place where you completely disconnect, and that is high recovery. And the high stress environment, that's where the positive stress or negative stress comes in. The positive stress, the eustress, that leads to growth. But interestingly, he says it only leads to growth if it's followed by a period of rest. And in order to become a lead at anything, you have to constantly switch between these highly stressful environments to highly restful environments. Reminds me a lot of the life is not a marathon, it's a series of sprints. I don't think there's anything specific I take away from this. I feel like I'm kind of already doing this with the built-in, sabbaticals that we have at Blanc Media. Every 8th week, we take the week off. So reading this makes me thankful to have that cadence. And I think maybe if you are typical productivity person who's reading all these books because you just want to maximize your output, there's a good chance that this is a radical idea. And maybe you should take a break. And actually, the way to go faster is to slow down.
This is something that I've been having a conversation with Becky quite a bit lately, in that this whole peak moments concept, this peak, was it peak? Wasn't peak moments. I can't think of the second word of that.
Peak experiences.
Peak experiences.
That's actually in the next section he gets into those. But this is kind of priming the pump for that. Yeah.
It is. So when you have these big stressful times and then you need to rest from them, like I'm in the middle of one of these great big stressful times right now, and in the process of trying to maintain a day job and maintain some of my online stuff plus remodeling a house as fast as you possibly can, and trying to do all that stuff all at one time means that this is a period where there's a ton of learning happening in a very short amount of time. And the goal is to make sure our kids are brought along for the ride, which they've been loving it so far, which is a good thing. So trying to go through all of that, and then knowing, like we've talked about, like the culmination of this period for us is moving into the house. And I've already said we're taking at least 2 weeks off from any work on the house after we move, because that needs to be our break before we start doing, there's like a second wave of remodel we'll do after we move in. So we'll start in on that after that 2 weeks, but that's not, of course, that doesn't have to have the time frame that this one does. But we're in the middle of one of those right now. And like, okay, I want to learn as much from this as I possibly can. I've met a ton of people in this process, some of which I hope to become good friends with because they are way better at things than I am, and I would love to learn from them. So there's a lot of that going on. But all this to say, environment for Joe is changing very rapidly. So there you go.
Sure. Well, that's a good place to get into the second part, which is how to make willpower relevant. And one of the things that I jotted down here I wanted to talk about was this peak state and this disconnection, because here he gets into a little bit more specifics about these peak experiences, he calls them, which are rare, exciting, oceanic, deeply moving, exhilarating, elevating experiences that generate an advanced form of perceiving reality, are even mystical and magical in their effect upon the experimenter. They are essential to becoming a self actualized person, and they are most likely to occur in what he calls an enriched environment. An enriched environment can be either one where you are hyper connected or one where you are hyper disconnected. He uses the story of the person who is doing marketing, and when she's in Denver, she's full go, and then when she's there half of the month, and then the other place, I forget where she originates from, maybe it's Southern California or something, the other half of the month, and that's just kind of like a couple hours a day, and it's pretty chill, and she's just having lunch with people and networking and stuff like that. But when she's in Denver, she's like focused on the project and doing the work, and that cadence actually sounds pretty cool to me. I'm not sure I have the ability to do that sort of thing. I like the fact that they're in different locations, different spots. I feel like that's an easy way to do this, to force yourself into a new state and compartmentalize. But for most people, that's not an option, especially when things get shut down and now you have to work from home, school from home, everything from home, right? Everything becomes blended, and that's not great. But one of the other ways that you can kind of separate these things is to uh, to disconnect completely. So he says to get into a peak state, you have to be able to disconnect. And I immediately thought of my personal retreat thing that I do every 3 months. It made me thankful for that process. And I've been doing it now for several years. So Rachel's on board and she supports it. I'm not sure it would have lasted very long if I didn't have my wife's support for that. And she does the same sort of thing. Usually it's a little bit shorter, but we do carve out the space for her to have some more regular thinking time to wherever we can get it. Um, but I don't know, what did you think when you were reading this section on like peak state and disconnecting? What did this mean to you, and is there anything that you're hoping to do about this in the future? I know things are a little bit crazy right now in the apartment, working on the house, all that kind of stuff, but like, I don't know, is there any sort of process for this you're looking to implement?
Yeah, and it's been very intentional on my part. So, and I started doing this even before we picked up this book to go through it. But at night, and this is on a day to day basis. This isn't a. It's not like a personal retreat that's happening on a recurring month to month or quarterly basis. It's a daily thing. And what I've been doing is at night, when we're done working on the house, it's a 5 acre property with about 2 acres of woods on the back that has a bunch of trails cut through it. The previous owner had a bunch of these trails, and there's a big open prairie that we don't own it, but there's a big prairie on the back side of it that our property butts up to. So what I've been doing is when I'm done working on the house at night, everybody is packed up, house is locked up, we're ready to leave and go back to the apartment. I go for walks out on those trails by myself. And it's usually about a 15-20 minute walk that I go on, and it gives me a chance to just settle down from the craziness of trying to hustle all day long. That's what I've been doing now. Now, of course, I'm not there at that time of night every night of the week, but when I am, that's what I'm doing. I have to admit, I'm super excited to get moved into the house because I want to make that a morning and evening thing. Obviously, if
Sure.
I live there, it's very easy to walk out the back door and go walk through the woods, and that's what I would love to do. The question mark there is, what do you do in the winter? You live up north where we do, so it's like when you get a foot of snow, what's going to happen out on those trails? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'll buy a set of snowshoes and keep doing it. So we'll see.
You
But
put on your yak tracks and you go for a run anyways.
exactly. We'll do something. So I intend to make that a daily routine. I'm not able to do that every single day right now, especially in the mornings because I'm not there. So whenever we get moved, that's definitely on the goal list of altering Joe's daily environment and routines for sure.
Sweet. I like that example. I think that's great. I've been thinking through what I could do on a regular basis to split these up for myself too, and nothing really comes to mind. Although going for a walk was one of the first things that I thought of. I remember reading, I think it was Daily Rituals, though we didn't cover it for Bookworm. It was a Gap book, a whole bunch of like couple page bios of really famous people and kind of their daily routines. Surprising number of them spent the morning creating and then the afternoons walking around their property.
Yep. Yep. It's so true.
Yeah.
So
Also, a lot of them had some sort of meditation, prayer, journaling habit. Which in this particular chapter, he talks about all three of those going together. I thought that was a kind of cool description. I never really thought about the overlap of all three of those, although as soon as I did, it made perfect sense.
yes. Like, oh wait, I suppose those would work together.
Yep, yep, exactly. The other thing from this chapter, though, that I really liked was the weekly planning session. He's got several questions that I think are just kind of get you thinking type questions. I'm not sure they're meant to be replicated, but they were good. Thought, how did the previous week go? What were my wins? What could have gone better? Any significant moments? What are my plans for next week? How am I going to take what I've learned into next week? What are my bigger picture goals? What are my proximal goals? What specific to dos do I have to finish this week? I kind of reworded those into my own language when I jotted them down into my MindNode file here. But that's one of the things I look at when people give you like a series of questions. I feel that's a really great place to locate whether they're a voice worth listening to. If they give you good questions, then I feel like they are more thoughtful and I'm more likely to align with their perspective. They've got more credibility in my head if they have gotten me to ask a good question. However, frequently, most of the the questions I see people pose, because I've been around this space long enough and I've seen enough good questions, you can kind of tell someone's just making some stuff up and throwing them on a page. I can sniff that out from a mile away. These I thought were good though.
Yeah, he spent some time with these. I will say, like, I do have an action item from this section though. It's the, he's got the weekly planning sessions. I don't know that I'm going to adopt his questions, but I've been doing journaling at night, which is, if you follow the whole time frame here, whenever I do that walk at night through the woods, when I get back to the apartment, I am in dire need of a shower. You don't want to be anywhere near me whenever I get to that point, usually covered in plaster dust and such. But whenever I get back, I'll take a shower and then I do my best to grab the journal and just write down how I feel the day went. And that can take a lot of different forms, but it's been extremely helpful for me to just process my thoughts as far as what's going on. But he did talk about journaling in the morning as well, which is something that I hadn't really processed much. I think I just lost you. But I hadn't processed that one a whole lot. So that's something that I want to try to take on, as having like a morning journaling routine. Are you going to come back or not? He totally dropped off. This is totally fun. Hi, guys. He says he lost me. Okay, this is fun. According to everything, it says I'm still streaming and such, so I don't think it's my internet. Okay, thanks, Carol. Thanks, John. It's good to know I'm still here and it's not me. Yeah, that's what I got too. Mike's a white box. Did he go away completely? I don't know where he went. He's messaging me somewhere and I don't see it. I know he was getting fuzzy from time to time, and it wasn't on my end. I can see all the network stuff on my end. It's totally not mine. Yep, he just says, 1 second, I think my internet just went down. That's what he's telling me. Well, how's the book, everybody? Totally leaving this in the video. The house is going well. I can see the second floor ceiling from the first floor because I have the ceiling out in, well, it's more than half of the first floor. I have the ceiling out, plus 2 walls are coming out, plus a third wall on the first level is going to get a widened entrance, which means that on the first floor, there's a living room or a family room at the very beginning when you first come in the house. Then there's like this pass-through area, which was like a walk-in pantry, but it's open doors on both sides, kind of weird. Then you would go into the kitchen, then it would go into the dining room. Well, we're taking the 2 walls out between that little pass-through and the dining room, and then widening the entrance to that family room, which means that from end to end sight line in the house, there's about a 76-foot span where it'll be completely open from one end to the other. That's what I'm in the middle of doing. But in order to do all of that, HVAC needs rerouted. I've got about 300 feet worth of electrical cable I've got to reroute and pull. I got to put in 2 beams. I got to put up new drywall on the ceiling. I got to put new floors in upstairs because they're not level because it's a 126-year-old house. So there's a whole bunch of stuff I got to do there too. So all that to say, I've got it torn apart officially now. And now I got 2 months to put it back together. Now, thankfully, like the drywall stuff I'm going to hire, the carpet stuff I'm going to hire. The rest of it, though, I think I'm doing. So all the electrical, all the HVAC, framing, that's all on my shoulders. Oh, and the flooring and the kitchen cabinets. Did I say that? We're putting new kitchen cabinets in it and a new floor for the kitchen, dining, bathroom. Oh yeah, the bathroom's got to get a leveled floor, which means the toilet and vanity and everything's got to come out and then go back in. Did I mention I have 2 months? Great fun, right? So yes, it's a lot of work, Carol. Super fun though. I will say it's oddly refreshing. Like I took last week off and that's all I did was work on the house. And I think I have so many ideas about topics and such that we could talk about for streams and Analog Joe and such, just because it's been super, how do I say that? Super, I don't want to say mind numbing, but it's something you can take your mind off of. Like you can take your mind off of so much of the thinking thing. Like, for example, I decided to take the ceiling down in one area because it'd be a lot easier to work with things throughout this whole process and cheaper overall to take it down than leave it. And whenever I made that decision, it's like, okay, the decision made. So I have that foundation. Well, then it's just hammers and crowbars at that point. Well, then your mind starts to wander in the middle of that. So you make a decision and then you're off to the work side. And then you end up having the process of making decisions and acting on them. Again, like once you're done with that, then you move on to the next thing. You make a decision about what's happening next, and then you move on to working on it. And then it can be mind-numbing of sorts. So anyway, kind of interesting. I wonder if I should call him in. I can do that. I think I can do that. I gotta connect my phone to this Rodecaster though. I haven't done that before, so this would be a first if we decide to do this. Always waiting for the Eero to come back on. That's what he's doing. Where did it go? There it is. So if his Eero doesn't come back on, I'll phone him in. Exactly, Carol. Decide on what you're going to clean, go at it, and then you come back to it. The decision-making process. You decide at work, decide, work. All right, this says I'm connected. We'll wait for him to say what's going on. Yeah, I got it. I got this. We can just phone him in whenever this happens. I've thought about doing this on stream before, like having the whole radio show thing where you can phone in, give you a Google Voice number, and you could call my phone, actually. I suppose that I could just load on the computer and do it that way, but you can use your phone to do it. That's like the whole Clubhouse thing. I've not done anything on Clubhouse, but I could. And do it with the fancy mic and stuff. Great fun. Nothing like waiting on a co-host. I just hope he's still recording. That's always the trick with this stuff, is like you always want it to be recorded all the way through. You can always splice it later. People make that mistake. Whenever you get into doing video work or podcast work, they have a tendency to want to like stop it between things. That way they get the segments. And then, oh, he thinks he's back online now. Oh. I hear him. I see him. Well, yes, I see him. There he is.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks.
We've had fun. We've had long chats without you.
Oh boy. Sorry.
What was that all about? Your internet just dropped? Eero dropped?
Yeah, just completely dropped.
Okay. Welcome back. I connected my phone to the Rodecaster. That way you could call in and I could at least get your audio into the deal. So there's that.
I don't know. Sorry, I forget where you were going. We were talking about weekly planning sessions, I think.
That's okay. I think I've got where I was when you dropped out. I tried to note it mentally.
Okay.
So I'll jump in here. Are you still editing, or is Toby editing?
Theoretically, Toby.
Okay.
But
We'll throw him a hard one here.
Yeah.
All right, so let me try to jump in here. So one of the things that I want to make sure I'm doing, like I've been doing the journaling thing at night, right? So I do the journaling at night, and that kind of helps me get a feel for how things have gone that day, working on the house or whatever it is that's been important. It helps me process my thoughts. Well, one of the things he mentions in this book is doing that in the morning to prep you for that day. I didn't write down any of the questions that he posed to ask at that time, but it is something that I want to kind of add to the mix. Like, okay, I've already got journaling at night. I've got my walks in nature at night. Eventually, I'll be able to add that in the morning, the nature walk piece. But I would like to add in the journaling piece in the morning as well, which is kind of reminiscent of morning pages. But
yeah,
I don't think it's going to be anywhere near that extensive, because that's like a 45-minute to an hour-long commitment, at least for me. Some people say they can do it in 15 minutes, and I still can't figure out how you do that. But
ain't nobody got time for that.
No. So if I can figure out like a 5, maybe 10-minute morning journaling routine of sorts, I think that would be helpful. So that's one of the action items I have from this section.
Well, I have an action item here to create a weekly planning template. I don't know if it's going to specifically use these questions, but I do like these questions. And I think I want to ask a couple of these as I'm thinking about the week ahead. I also think that Obsidian is a great place to do that.
Of course.
Which is why I think it might work for me, because I can just kind of add it on to my current journaling workflow. which is basically built around daily questions. And then I have a separate section on my daily notes for journal entries. So when there's a significant event, I'll jot about it and then I'll hashtag journal/entry. So it applies both the journal and the entry tags. And then there's a gratitude section at the bottom. I don't fill those two sections out every day. I do the daily questions every day. One of the things that makes this stick for me, because it's not something that you just do at the end of the day. If I just put off the journaling until the end of the day, I'll forget about the significant event. So I got to capture it, right after it happens. So one of the things that I've done is I have installed the Daily Notes core plugin, and then there's an option in there to open it to today's daily note. So I have that toggled on, and if you set up your Vault in your iCloud folder, those plugin preferences sync as well. So now when I open up Obsidian on the Mac, it takes me to the daily note. If I open it on my iOS device, my iPhone, it takes me to that daily note. And now I can just put in the scores for the daily questions or jot down a journal entry or gratitude whenever I'm thinking about it, because it's all on that one note. I'm ashamed to say I just discovered that workflow, but I think that's going to be very effective for me. And I think the weekly planning can fit into there nicely. Just need to figure out how I'm going to do that specifically. So the action item is to create a weekly planning template, and I need to figure out what exactly it's going to do. But I'm 99% sure it's going to take place in Obsidian somewhere.
Makes sense. I would expect absolutely nothing less from you, Mike. Mine, my setup is in the trusty bullet journal. So there you go. As expected, I
the
assume.
trusty bullet journal.
Yep. Good old pen and paper.
The next thing I want to talk about from this section is, I just jotted it down as Newton's third law, but this is from chapter 6, where he talks about that everything in your life is energy, and when you make a decision, it has an equal and opposite reaction. I think this pertains to even something like you just mentioned, the pen and paper bullet journal stuff. So like you decide, hey, I'm going to do this. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that is going to happen, like the fact that you do a lot of stuff online and you have to reconcile that, right? But those are forces that are going to be competing against this new behavior that you're trying to create. You can't just say, oh, well, this thing looks fun, I'm going to try it. Because the minute that you decide to try it, there is going to be something on the other side that is trying to pull you back to the level you were at or the way you were doing things. You're not just going to stumble into a better future. And I think it's valuable to recognize that there is, every time we make a decision for an action item, whether we succeed with it or not, the moment that we say, I have this action item, there is now a competing force in the universe that is trying to make us fail at that action item. So recognizing that there's going to be some resistance that you need to overcome. In some cases, that's all that's required. In other cases, that's just the first step.
I did a coaching call with a gentleman here a few weeks ago, and he was attempting to do a certain workflow, a certain system. I'm not going to go into the details of that because we'll be here way too long. But he was trying to implement a system, okay? And that system, in his mind, dictated the use of a certain piece of software. He had never worked with that piece of software before.
Oh boy.
So I told him, do not do this. Like, this is a problem. You are going to fail at this. Like, I don't want to sugarcoat this in any way. If you attempt to learn that tool and you attempt to learn this system at the same time, almost guaranteed you will fail at this. And it will take you much, much longer to achieve what you're trying to achieve. Instead, what you need to do is, whenever you have something pushing on you, like you need to adopt something, trying to go a different direction and take on a different system or a different tool at the same time is absolutely going to cause you problems. You're better off going to a known tool, which is why, in your case, Obsidian, obviously, like, you should, right? That is by far the answer you should have to that. If you're going to adopt a new thing that can easily be transformed into just raw text, in your case, it should be an Obsidian. in my case, almost every single time that's in a pen and paper notebook. So, of course, it should be there because I know it and it's not going to create problems for me down the road. So, there you go. That's my take on Newton's third law.
Cool. I do think there's a little bit more complexity than we just made it sound like
Very much so.
with this. And you do have to recognize, like with the app stuff specifically, this stuff kind of grinds my gears because people often assume that a different app is going to solve their problem. I stumbled upon a clip, I think Matt Birchler shared it on Twitter, of a podcast episode with Casey Newton describing the task manager that he was going to use. And he's like, I just picked the prettiest one because I know next year I'm going to want to switch to something else anyways. And they've all got the same features at this point.
That's brilliant. It's kind of
Yeah.
true, though.
So I don't know. There's an element of truth to that, I think, where part of it is just if you enjoy the tools that you're using, then it's easier to do your work. But also there's the other side of that, which is if I have a system already that allows me to do the work, I should therefore not go see what else is new. And I don't know that there's any clean by the line there. Like especially with something like the bullet journal method that you do, because you do so much other stuff on in the tech space. I mean, are you just saying like I'm never going back to digital task management? I mean, is that a stance you're willing to take right now?
It's messy intentionally.
Yeah.
And people get really confused and all bent out of shape over this. And I totally get it. I do. But for me, what I have found is if I keep track of my day-to-day, week-to-week, like ritual-based stuff in the bullet journal and keeping track of what is it I need to do today, this week, this month, like that sort of thing, or not even this month really, today and this week, that's really where the bullet journal stops. But whenever I have templated projects, like this bullet journal, this Bookworm episode, I have a whole series of, I think it's like 160 check boxes that I've got to go through from reading the book to publishing the episode, which you do mostly, but all the stuff that is on my side that makes that happen, right? So all of those are in a templated checklist, but that's in Obsidian. And that's because I've been keeping, like, I wrote some of this stuff down just because I like having it on paper in front of me, but a lot of times I'll capture some notes on paper and then I transfer it into Obsidian for book notes. But a lot of times those book notes are in the text file that I created for the Bookworm episode, which also contains that template. So those tasks are kind of scattered through some text files now. And I was doing that with a mix of OmniFocus and Obsidian, but I've migrated all that over to Obsidian at this point because it's easier to keep the tasks and the notes in one place, which is a bit backwards from what I've done in the past, but it seems to work.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also know I'm not using Obsidian anywhere near what you're doing either. Like I'm not using it as a thinking tool at all. So that's not on my radar to use it in that way, but I don't know, seems to work well for me to have things kind of broken up that way with templated projects in Obsidian, but all of the other task management type stuff goes in the bullet journal. But I will say, like we use for all the house remodel stuff, I've been using Basecamp with my wife. So that's where we've been managing all of the house project stuff, all the stuff that's got to be done before we move, after we move, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where that lives.
Yeah, I think there's some inertia based off of the choices that you have previously made, but that doesn't necessarily indicate whether a choice is good or bad.
Right.
I think this one's pretty whatever you feel like doing.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about creating new habits or setting some goals for things that you want to achieve, I think the completion of the activity, if it's a positive habit or a positive goal you're trying to achieve, that's the good state, and the bad state is, well, I didn't do it. And with those specifically, that's where I see a lot of this equal and opposite reaction stuff coming in. You don't think about it that way when you decide, I'm going to create a journaling habit or a mindfulness meditation habit
Right.
or a habit of exercising every day. That someone on the other end is like, oh, really? Well, we'll see about that. Not
Yes.
if I have anything to say about it.
Yes.
But that's really what happens.
It's true. There's always somebody on the other side trying to stop it. Like, even if you, and this happens, if you make a statement that you're going to start a habit or you're going to release a product, what's one of the first things you hear? Like, oh, that's really hard. Oh, that takes a lot of work. Oh, that's a
Yes,
difficult
it
task to
does.
take on. Why is, oh, that's a big project. Like, these are the comments you'll hear almost immediately, which is a hint in the exact opposite direction of where you want to go. And I know from talking to, I've been trying to get to know, in the middle of everything I've been doing at the house, you meet a lot of these subcontractors, and a lot of them are self made kind of entrepreneurs of sorts. So they are kind of living similar things to what you and I do. Like, they're starting things and such. And they will tell you that every time they try to go on a new endeavor, they have people telling them that's not going to work. And they know that they're headed in the right direction. And whenever they have people who tell them that, they generally will try to cut them out of the whole process and not listen to them anymore. And we lost Mike again. But I had to finish the thought. That way it's still there. I think Mike has internet issues today. I guess I should have my phone on because he might call me now. Did you know that Face ID doesn't work when it's behind our microphone? Like, I can't do Face ID like this. It doesn't work. Yeah, if I don't finish the thought, Blake, it's just gone. Da, 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 da. Where did he go? Where did he go? He lost internet again. All right, let's see if he's going to call me. Having an Apple Watch is nice. Lets you open it. Can't see your face. Oh, you hear that? Hello, sir. Are you there? Oh, wait, hold on. There. Now I think Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can people in the stream hear you? That's the main question here.
No, probably not.
Well, I'm taking this call through the Roadcaster.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe they can.
So I Bluetoothed my phone to the Roadcaster. So let's see.
Sorry.
All right. Blake says he can hear us both.
Okay.
So there you go.
All right.
Do you want to continue like this, or do you want to try
I don't know what else to do on my end. I unplugged the router. I unplugged the Eros. Everything was working after that, but obviously something is still up. I have a wired connection to my Mac, so I have no idea.
I suspect it's your ISP.
I suspect that as well.
Okay.
Super fun.
So I'm still recording on my side. I can hear you.
Okay.
I assume you're still recording
on my side.
So
yeah.
The stream's still live. They can hear you. So if you want, we can just keep going as is, or we can do, I don't know what, something different.
Sure. Let's just keep going. So last thing I heard was you were talking to the contractors.
Yes. So I've been talking to a bank of these subcontractors, And it's interesting how many of them are entrepreneurs. Like they started that business, right? And as with a lot of entrepreneurs, like they always have people telling them what will and won't work or what type of business model to take on. And I just for fun, I was talking to my drywall guy, which he's got to come in like 5-6 weeks. I'm not ready for him now, but he I was talking to him about how he got his business going and how he got it up and running and stuff, and was talking to him about like how many people will tell you stuff doesn't work when you want to make it work. He's like, "Oh yeah, I just decided early on that whenever someone tells me that something won't work or it's going to be too hard, like I just won't talk to them anymore." Like, okay, sure, that'll work. So yes, it's something that does exist. It's something that I think it can work is whenever you have these negative influences, like when people are pushing back against you, this equal and opposite uh, energy that's happening whenever you try to make a decision. You need to counteract it or ignore it in this case, as these guys are doing.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the next point on the outline, which is what if it's not equal and opposite? What do you do if you're in an environment where you can't control the forces at play there? And immediately I thought of obviously an office environment where you've got a boss or a manager who is dictating the way that you do things, but that's not the only one that comes to mind. I think the process is probably the same for all of these. The advice that he gives in this last chapter, chapter 8, I feel is pretty brilliant if you sit and think about it for a little while, because of the chapter before this is talking about changing your default options. Okay, so that's great when you have the ability to set your own course and make intentional choices and change the default options. But what if you can't control the options that are presented to you? In that case, he advises that you create automated responses for situations where you know you will be triggered. Have any examples of this that you'd be willing to share?
Like default answers whenever something could go wrong. Like, okay, so here's
Just
one.
a situation where you know you're going to get triggered.
Sure. One thing that really, 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 really bugs me is whenever I have people point out things they don't like about a technical production that they aren't willing to help with. So I work at a church. We operate off of a volunteer base, right? This is fairly standard practice. And I regularly need people to volunteer for things like on a weekly basis. I need volunteers. And I have a pretty good base of folks who are willing to help out, but it's the folks outside of that team that like to offer suggestions unsolicited. And it really, really bugs me. Like, I don't know why that is, but whenever people really, really want to tell me how things are not going well, but they don't want any part in helping solve the problem, that's when I start to have issues. So this has been a while back now. I just decided, like, okay, every time somebody comes up to me and they have an issue with the technical production, because obviously I'm the one in charge of how that all goes down. Anytime I get those complaints, my first response is, I hear you. Would you be willing to help us solve it? And that is my default response. And sometimes, as in once, I've had somebody say, yeah, I could help. And every other time it's been, I don't know that I'm going to be able to help you with that. Like, oh, okay. All right. Well, if you change your mind, please let me know if you'd be willing to help us make this production better. Like, I'm all ears if you're willing to help. Which I'm not saying it, but what I'm essentially saying is I'm not listening to a word you say unless you're willing to help me fix it. That's really what I'm saying. But that's the hard part about it, right? So that's kind of one of my default responses. I don't know if that's the right way to handle that situation, but for whatever reason, that whole scenario is one that really trips my trigger.
I like that a lot. As you're talking about that, I'm trying to think of a way to summarize that stance. I don't know if it's correct or not either, but I tend to agree with your approach to this, which is if you aren't willing to commit, then I don't want the feedback.
Yes, yes. Which again, I don't know if that's the right stance to take in that scenario. It's just that people really, really, really like to complain. And it
Yeah.
seems like when you flip the table and it's like, okay, if you're going to be the negative Nancy here, you need to be willing to go to work. Like, I don't want to just listen to complaints unless you're willing to do something about it. So, again, I don't know if that's the right way to, again, it's a church, right? So, I don't know. That's what I've chosen to do. I haven't had anybody really, really get upset with me over that, but
Yet.
yes, yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that feels fair to me. I think it's a good filter because I think a lot of people, and myself included, will tend to offer feedback when it's not asked for, with maybe the intention, at least we tell ourselves, the intention of helping the person solve the problem that we so clearly see. But often, even if we do bring attention to a legitimate problem, it's really not helping unless we are willing to be part of the solution. So
Yes, yes.
my gut says that's a pretty decent rule of thumb, but I don't know for sure.
I don't know. I know that I've recommended that process to a couple other volunteer team leaders, and I know a couple other folks have adopted that, and actually in their particular case, they've gained a lot more volunteers that way. So I think it does help to some degree,
Yeah.
but because because the teams that I'm in control of are fairly skilled positions, I think I don't get as many people willing to actually help.
Yeah, I think that's probably true too. The example that comes to mind for me is in-person meetings. I can't stand a poorly organized in-person meeting, and I'm kind of fortunate that for the last year and a half, a lot of the local meetings have been via Zoom, and we're kind of in this place now where people are pushing to meet back in person. And the way that I am embracing this, what to do in an environment you can't control, is to drag my feet and basically create a scenario where I can still join virtually to hide my annoyance with the way things are run.
Sure.
That sounds terrible. I need to not show my displeasure for things, but like there's some meetings that I'm thinking of specifically that they're scheduled for an hour and they take 2 hours every single time, and it ends up being a monologue. And I'm very, very glad that they're poorly run meetings that I can attend virtually where everybody has their cameras off, because then I just turn my camera off too and no one can see me rolling my eyes.
Yeah. I remember
So that's
early on in the pandemic when we were shut down, there was none of our staff was at the building, but I was in control of the live streams, right? So I was here at the building, which is where I'm at currently. So I was at work, but no one else was. So it's kind of weird, but they would want to do these Zoom calls. Well, the rule of thumb when you're doing a Zoom call is like you cut your meeting in half of what it would have been in person, if not more. Like that's generally what they say, because it doesn't have all the interactions over Zoom as what you would have in person. But it seems like people who aren't used to that make them much longer. It's like, just shoot me now. I am so grateful for being able to turn things off, because I'll just throw the AirPods in. I'm going to keep working on my thing. I'll stay within about 50 feet of my computer and I'll be fine. Or I'll join Zoom from my phone and carry it around with me. Like, that's what I'm going to do. Because I don't want people to see that I'm not paying any attention to what they're doing, but I still need to be on the call.
It's true. And in the past, I think I would have tried to change the meeting culture, and then I still try to push things in the right direction when I feel like I have an opportunity to do so. But I also know that for the most part, my advice is not going to be heard or heeded. So I'll just play by everybody else's rules and
Sure.
see what I can get away with. It's not an ideal situation. Ideally, we have an effective in-person meeting. Since that's not going to happen, how do I make this suck the least? It's kind of the approach I'm taking. And I think ultimately, when you're talking about an environment you can't control, that's kind of the approach you have to have. Is like you think and you plan for the worst case scenario, and then when it happens, you're not surprised. You don't get bent out of shape. You just initiate your pre-planned response immediately, even though it's not maybe ideal. But
Yes.
yeah, I think that's helpful. I think the situations that he describes for the majority of the book don't fall into this category. But I also, unlike some of the other books that we've read, feel like his advice to someone who's not in a situation that he's in is still pretty good. There are other books that we've read where it's like, oh, well, you just apply this way if you're an employee instead of a CEO. And I'm like, maybe not. Thanks for the tip, but no way that's actually going to work.
Yep.
I feel like this one, there's at least some clear path forward for just about anybody.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, because you can at least figure out how you're going to respond to things. Like it's the classic, I can't change what you can do. I can't change what you do, but I can change my response to what you do. So it's kind of that concept.
Yeah, exactly. All right, and then part 3 is outsource high performance and success to your environment. As I mentioned before, I feel like this is the longest part of the book. Feels like the longest part of the book. There's 6 chapters here, 9 through 14, and they all tackle a specific aspect of outsourcing your performance to your environment. I think it's very possible that listeners to Bookworm, they're not going to be blown away by every single one of these, but there's probably something in here for everybody. I'll just run through the chapters real quickly. Chapter 9 is embed forcing functions into your environment. Chapter 10, more than good intentions. Chapter 11, grow into your goals. Chapter 12, rotate your environment. Chapter 13, find unique collaborations. Chapter 4, never forget where you came from. I just picked out a couple of things from these chapters which kind of stood out to me. First one being the forcing functions from chapter 9. And these are self-imposed situational factors that quite literally force you to act and achieve what you had intended. I immediately thought of some negative versions of these. Like, I remember hearing a story about somebody who would pre-schedule an embarrassing tweet to go out at like 6 in the morning, so it would force him to get up before then and turn it off every day. And if he didn't, then it was going to go out and it said something like, so-and-so is a lazy bum who didn't bother to get up and turn off this embarrassing tweet, something like that. So I had no trouble envisioning negative versions of these, but I wasn't real clear on how I might apply these. He does talk about the most potent forcing functions are high investment, there's social pressure, there's high consequences for poor performance, there's high difficulty, and there's novelty associated with these. I was curious, though, did you have any insight into forcing functions? Are you planning to do anything with these?
I'm in the middle of a very big one with a house right now. So
that's true.
we did this very intentionally. Whenever we set up the lease for our apartment, we set up a 6-month lease. And the reason for that was we didn't want to be in an apartment for more than 6 months. So the choice we had was to either find a house that needed a decent amount of work early on in that lease and buy it and work on it until our lease expired, or we needed to, over time, decrease the amount of work that a house needed that we were looking for so that we could get one bought that needed less work done so that we could move into it towards the end of our lease. Like that was our forced deadline in the process. And we can go month to month after the lease, but the price goes up, and we didn't want to do that. So we kind of forced ourselves into this. So with that, I've got this deadline in October where the house has to be move-inable, and that is forcing me to make a lot of life choices to get a house ready to go very quickly. So if you don't get the gist, like, this house has been very much what I've been eat, sleep, and breathing for the last month now. So everything kind of is seen through that lens right now. But yes, I've kind of set this deadline that's forced based on a lease expiring at that point.
That's a good example. I have a little bit of trouble around wrapping my head around that one, though, because that is an example of, like, later on he talks about burning the boat, where you have to have a house to live in. I guess technically you don't, because you do have the apartment, and like you said, you are going to keep paying rent on it if you aren't moving into the new place. But I feel like that's less optional than some of the other stuff that he has on here. Like, you're going to move into the house. It's a matter of when. And I'm trying to figure out for myself how and where I might want to apply these. Like, for example, in this section, he talks about the idea of flipping the sunk cost fallacy and using it for forcing functions. And sunk cost fallacy, I was an economics minor in college, so that caught my attention, where you've made a big investment in something, and so you just convince yourself that you're just going to keep going with this thing because you've already made this big investment in this thing. And the economic perspective is, well, it doesn't matter how much you have invested in something. If it's still the wrong choice, then the best thing you can do is to stop investing in that. And even if you have to throw away all the money that you have invested in that thing, make the right choice now. It's going to be better off in the long term. I like the idea of using this in terms of creating positive habits and setting positive goals, but I can't figure out how I would want to do this. I guess, if you've got a streak, like I still practice my Spanish every night, like 650 days or something in a row. So that's kind of a sunk cost fallacy. Like, well, I can't throw away that giant streak. I'm just going to keep going so I don't break the chain. I guess maybe that's a version of it, but I'm having trouble thinking of a real practical way that, generally speaking, anybody could implement this sort of thing.
Sure. Well, if you're following the chat, Blake talks about having an appointment with a trainer. So you've got the sunk cost of hiring the trainer, and you've got the appointment made with them. You've kind of got the forcing function of the every other week scheduling of Bookworm. Like, you have some of these already. You've got the sabbatical weeks that you take off, but you generally have launches somewhere in the middle. So you've got these deadlines that are forced in there. So you kind of have a lot of these.
True. Yeah. Maybe that's why I'm having trouble thinking of other places that I might implement this, because I've got all the low-hanging fruit already. But
possibly, yeah. Which might beg the question, why add another one?
Yeah, true. I guess one thing to be said about this book is that there is an emphasis on achieving a specific goal. He uses launching a book towards the end as a specific example, but obviously there's a bias here towards goals, and you know how I feel about goals. I much prefer habits.
You're a big fan.
Yeah. So forcing functions, I don't think translate real well into habits. Changing your environment does, and setting things out to make it easy to initiate a habit, I feel like does. But I don't know, maybe the forcing functions and the sunk cost that goes into some of these, maybe that doesn't really fit with show up every day.
I feel like it could. It would just depend on what you show up for.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, if you were to say you're going to launch a YouTube channel in 3 weeks, that would force you into doing a lot of video editing and such, and launching a product of sorts. Like, if you did something like that.
That's tied to a goal, though, right? Launching the product or launching
Sure.
the YouTube channel.
Yep. True.
So I guess my question is, the goal a necessary component to the forcing function?
To me, the forcing function is a tool to be used if needed, not like it's not a requirement, but if you have a goal that you're trying to achieve and you're having a hard time achieving it, using a forcing function to help you with that would be the answer, or one of the answers. But it's not, like, I feel like it's not a necessary, like it's something to be added on if required.
Sure. Okay. That's fair.
That's the way I took it anyway. Maybe I misunderstood it.
No, I think you're right. I do think that fits very well with the idea of goals, not so much with habits. But the next point on the list here, and the next chapter actually, which is More Than Good Intentions, this talks about learning styles. This part I feel aligns better with the concept of habits, because it talks about the growth mindset, going back to the book by Carol Dweck, which is one of the better books we have ever read. That one might get more mentions than Flow at this point. I'm not sure. Probably pretty close.
Yeah.
But he mentions here that people with a fixed mindset have a really hard time learning. And that spoke to me because from a point several years ago, I have identified as someone who personal growth is very important to me. So I want to be a lifelong learner. And that's one of the things that my wife and I have explicitly decided we want to teach our kids to be lifelong learners, because that is going to serve them better than getting into the right school or getting the right degree ever could, unless they're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, and they need the piece of paper, in which case, I'd support them if that's what they really want to do, but whatever. I want them to be able to learn, and not just in a classroom. So there's these different learning styles here: imagining, reflecting, analyzing, deciding, acting, and experiencing, just to name a couple of them. And he says that people tend to have a growth mindset and learning styles that they're comfortable with, but a fixed mindset in those that they are uncomfortable with. I think this is an interesting idea, and I think it's 100% true. I can see how I have fallen into this in the past, but also I'm kind of encouraged by this because I've sort of embraced the fact that I don't have certain skills and I don't feel comfortable learning certain ways, and I've kind of forced myself to try to learn those ways anyways, if that makes any sense. So like, I've never really been a big YouTube person, but I am starting to get into YouTube, and primarily finding and watching videos from people who are speaking intelligently about topics that I'm interested in. The whole video format is just not the way that I would have traditionally chosen to learn something. And it's not like given a choice between reading a book or listening to a book or watching a book, that they're all equal, but there is information that is valuable that I wouldn't be able to get any other way that I'm going to YouTube for, even though it's still kind of low on the totem pole of the ranking of sources for me. But point being that I'm kind of forcing myself to learn in a channel that isn't naturally comfortable for me. I think also the whole sketchnote, my journey with sketchnotes is another example of this, where like I never really was a visual learner. I would always take notes on a computer, and then kind of decided one day, read this study that if you took notes by hand, you retained more. You didn't get as much information. You couldn't keep up, word for word, but that's okay because you have to sort of synthesize what's going on and put it into your own words. And so you retain more information. And then I came across sketchnoting. I'm like, oh, I bet it's that concept, to the nth degree. And so even though my first sketchnotes were absolutely terrible, stick figure in a bunch of words, I forced myself to do it over and over again. And I've been able to see the benefit of forcing myself to learn that way, even though it was super uncomfortable at the beginning. So I guess I'm discovering that I can and am willing to embrace the discomfort when it comes to these different learning styles. Is there anything in this section here on these learning styles that you see for yourself? Like, this is the one that I kind of gravitate towards, or this is one that I've been thinking about for a while, but I've been dragging my feet on it. Coming out of this, was there any sort of path forward for you in terms of continuing to develop a growth mindset?
I don't think so. I mean, at risk of beating a dead horse, like I've been forced into learning a lot of things from a house construction stance lately, and I think I've always had the mindset like, okay, if I don't understand how to do something or how something works, I can either figure it out, find somebody who can tell me how it works, or find it online somewhere. Like, those are generally the ways I've done things. Like, just to use a different example, I've got a running light that's out on our Suburban that I need to get replaced. I found out that GM is a genius, and it actually requires removing the fender well in order to get the running light out so you can replace it. Like, come on. So, like, I can learn how these things work and how to do them. And like, I feel like, I don't know if it's the growth mindset book, but I feel like I've always had this, like, I can figure out how things work, this mental model, if you will. So I've kind of always had that in the back of my head somewhere. So I can't say that's anything new, but I know that I've got a ton of things right now that I've been learning very intricate details on. Simple things too, like how do you lay out recessed lighting in a room? Like, I can walk you through the math on how to figure out how many lights and how to place them right now. Like, like I can do all of that. But these are things that I've had to learn in order to put a house together to keep, vehicles maintained, because I choose to do those things myself instead of outsourcing them. So I guess if there's something in this that I've kind of forced, is that I've made the decision to do a lot of things myself instead of trying to get other people to do them for me. Even the things that I'm going to pay other people to do right now, I'm paying other people to do them because they will do them better than me, because there's a little bit of an art form to it, and they can do it quicker than me, and I don't have time. So I can technically do, I can lay carpet, I can hang drywall, I can do the mud and stuff. Like, I can do all of that, but I'm not going to take the time to do it as well as they're going to be able to do it in the quick speed that they're going to be able to do that as well. So sometimes I will outsource things, even though I do have this tendency to say, I'm going to figure out how to do that myself and do it myself. I don't know if that answers what you're asking.
Kind of. I don't think I'm putting it very well. I feel like this chapter, he talks about at the very end, the primary obstacle is how you feel about what you need to do. And with these learning styles specifically, he talks about a behavioral inhibition system, which is when you perceive risks or threats that stop you from acting, and then a behavioral activation system where you perceive the rewards that encourage action. And it sounds to me like your behavioral activation system is very active, and you're not thinking about how stupid you're going to look trying to figure out how to hang drywall.
Right.
You're just going to figure it out because you're curious.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Like, whenever, like, okay, here's a good example too. Whenever I've gone to Home Depot, and here's a silly one. You'll love this one. The shut-off valves for the washing machine need replaced, okay? And I found out when I got to Home Depot that there's like 14,000 versions of these things, and I did not know that. And the nice thing about like Home Depot is the people who are, at least the local one, the people who are working there are like previous contractors and such. And one of the guys who was in the aisle there used to be a plumbing contractor. And I just asked him, like, I have an old house. I don't have a clue what I'm getting into here. Like, what am I not knowing that I need to pay attention to? Like, I don't mind asking that question, because I know I'm probably an idiot when it comes to, to how this stuff is supposed to be done. But if I'm willing to ask the question, I've learned that most of these people who have expertise in an area, they love teaching other people how to do it the right way. So I don't usually worry about me looking dumb, because if I can activate their teacher, then I can be a better student. I guess that's probably the way to put that.
Sure, and that's the thing I think a lot of people, myself included, would have trouble doing because you don't want to look like an idiot.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I kind of went through that when I started taking virtual guitar lessons last fall. Is I've been playing guitar for a long time. I play on the worship team at our church every single Sunday. And it's a little bit humbling to say I'm not happy with my current ability and I want to submit myself to somebody who is better than me, who can help me improve.
Sure.
And in order to do that, in order to have a coach, you're if you're working with a trainer, I think it's probably the same thing. Like, you have to admit how out of shape you are or how bad you are at something before somebody can really help you get better.
Right.
And that's not an easy thing, I think, for most people. But
sure. Well, here's another example. It's not really house related, which is probably a good thing. But for a long time, I've wanted to get into blacksmithing. When I was on the farm growing up, I used to do welding and such quite a bit. So I've done metal work quite a bit in the past, but I've never done blacksmithing. So I would love to make an axe head, or I don't even know what, make garden tools and stuff. Like, I would love to be able to just make stuff out of molten metal. I have no idea why I want to do that, but I do. And I discovered 2 weeks ago that one of the custodians here at our church has a blacksmith shop and has been doing this for quite some time. I was like, dude, when I'm done on this house and I get some more time, preferably in the winter because I know blacksmithing is hot, can I please come out to your place and you teach me? He's like, yeah, absolutely. We'll do like every other week lessons or something. Like, that'd be amazing. I would love that. So like, I guess I don't mind looking like a dummy sometimes. Maybe that's just me.
Well, I think I can get to the point where I'm okay with it, but it takes me a little while.
Sure.
Which is kind of the next point on the outline here. It talks about collaboration and also masterminds. So I feel like these are kind of related. The masterminds thing comes from chapter 11, grow into your goals. And this is where it talks about competing with people who are much better than you. Towards the end of this, he talks about joining a mastermind group. I don't think those two ideas map perfectly, although if you can get yourself in a mastermind with a bunch of people who are more successful than you, then absolutely do it. I do think the big value of the mastermind group is just getting people who can help you kind of see your blind spots and help you implement this context-based learning that he's talking about here, where you learn something at a surface level, you practice it, you get immediate feedback so you can smooth out your rough edges, you repeat it over and over, and then you get more coaching and feedback to assess and assess your knowledge and skills over time, so you're constantly looking for the next thing that you can improve. It's been a while since we've talked about masterminds. I know we've talked about it before. When you brought it up in this chapter, did it do anything in you like, yeah, I want to be a part of a group like that?
No.
I didn't think it would.
I see a lot of people talk about the benefits of masterminds. I know that there are certain personalities and people who think that they're the end all be all, and they might be for some people. I think my issue is that I generally don't enjoy the process of hearing other people talk about how good things are going in their businesses and such.
That is valid.
And that's what a lot of them tend to be that way, which they're not all, and that's not necessarily bad. I just don't have the patience for that. And
sure, I
would rather do like a one-on-one coaching deal, or having like two people specific. Like, if I were to go to a quote unquote mastermind where it's me and maybe two or three other people, and it's us focusing on one other person's business and we're trying to help that one person that whole time, then yeah, that's a very different thing. if I'm going into a scenario where I've got 4 or 5 people looking at my business to help me figure out how to do it better, that's a different thing. I think those are both very valid and good things to do. But most masterminds that I've participated in, seen, and such, it's round robin where you go around and you're switching roles midstream, which can work, but I feel like everybody gets like 15 minutes or so. And to me, 15 minutes is nowhere near enough to get anywhere solid. Like, you're basically just getting an intro when that intro is not what I need. And I need to go much, much deeper than that, which means that to me, to have a round robin mastermind that has the value that I'm trying to get out of it, it needs to be like 4 to 5 hours, and nobody's going to take the time for that. And that's not something I want to commit to. I'm sure you would, but that's not something I want to commit to, and I don't have that kind of time to devote to something like that. So if I want that feedback like he's talking about for masterminds, I'm going to seek out a coach in some form, which I've done in a few cases, but that's probably the route I would take.
That's an interesting alternative, I think, because you're right. The mastermind group that you join is going to be important and kind of everybody's expectations going into it. And I also don't think his definition of a mastermind group necessarily is the default definition for a mastermind group. The example that he uses is the Genius Network that Joe Polish does, and he's connected with Dan Sullivan and the strategic coach, unique ability stuff. I know somebody who was a part of that mastermind group. It's $25,000 a year, and they do call it a mastermind group. They meet 4 times a year, and they probably have those hot seat sessions that you were describing.
Yep.
One additional detail I got out of reading this was that if you don't 10x your investment in the first year, you can't join the next year, which I thought was interesting. I'm going to have to go back and ask my friend if he's still a member or not.
Yep.
Because I remember him coming back from one of those meetings and talking about the connections that he had made. And that gets into the collaboration piece of this. Because he says collaboration is the physical act of making new and novel connections. And I think this can apply to networking. It could also apply to ideas. And I think there's some maybe accidental overlap here with these terms of mastermind and collaboration. I do think the biggest value a mastermind group can have is helping you see things the right way, pointing out the weak spots if you're in a situation where you're actually getting legitimate feedback and you're not just praising everybody for the stuff that's going right. I don't think that's helpful, but I also recognize that that's what a lot of people want to hear. So whatever, it's just not for me. The collaboration piece, though, I think there's a lot of value in this too. Maybe this is worth maintaining those connections, even if you thought it was a mastermind and you discover it's actually a collaborative group, because he says 1 + 1 often equals 10 when it comes to collaboration, especially if you have people from diverse viewpoints, different perspectives, who can help you see things in a different way. He talks about the stages of conscious evolution, where you're socializing, everything is calculated to avoid fear and anxiety. Second level, self-authoring, where everything is to further your own agenda. And then the last level that almost nobody gets to is the transforming self, where you both value an agenda and are wary of it. I feel like that's where the collaboration, the different perspectives can come in, if they can help you see the weak spots, and not just identify the weak spots, but can help you build a better solution because they're coming at the problem from a different perspective. I don't think I have a collaborative group that I am actively a part of, although maybe my mastermind group kind of gets into this a little bit. I don't know, but I feel like these are 2 very different ideas. And if you were able to be a part of 2 different groups with these distinct purposes, that would probably be the best implementation of this. But I don't know. Do you have any interest in collaborating, given your current work responsibilities? Like, does this appeal to you at all?
Yes, very much so. To me, this is very, very different than a mastermind group, like the whole mastermind group versus a collaborative group. But I don't think I took the collaborative group as a set group of people that regularly rotates. I didn't take it that way at all, because I feel like I kind of do this. Like whenever I have people on as a guest for Analog Joe, well, that's a collaborative scenario. If I have
That's true.
a different podcast that I guest on, that's a collaborative deal. You get what I'm saying? Like anytime I make a connection, whenever I've been on Mac Power users in the past, like, well, that's me collaborating with David and Steven. Like that's the way that those work. So whenever I do those, like to me, that's building a collaboration network. Like this is a group of people that I can collaborate with on different, temporary projects. To me, that's what he was getting at. But I could see how you take it as a set group that rotates and collaborates inside itself. I could see that as well.
Well, I think these are both process-driven solutions to the problem of how do I get outside perspective. And I think the guest on Analog Joe, that could be a collaborative group, although I think there's a danger of it not being a collaborative group.
Yep.
Where you do just seek out the people who are just like you and saying the same things as you, and you get on the microphone and talk about the benefits of the bullet journal system, right? And I use that just to pick on you, but you can do the same thing with me with Obsidian. We've all got these different bubbles of belief going back to the liminal thinking book. And so how do you bust out of that? I feel like it takes some very intentional connecting with people who wouldn't just naturally be hanging out the same places that you would be.
Right.
If I'm a Mac fan and I'm listening to MPU, I mean, this is a stupid example, but it's probably worthwhile if I want to be able to speak intelligently about the tech space in general to go pay attention to what's going on in the Windows world and on Android, even though I don't want to be there, right? And so that's just if I were to decide that's the thing I want to do. You have to decide for yourself. But going into those other places can be uncomfortable.
So you haven't kept up with Windows 11. That's what you're telling me.
That is exactly what I'm telling you, and I am okay with that.
Well, if you follow their every other cycle, Windows 11 will be a flop, so we'll see.
Yeah, and I just picked that one because I feel like there's not a whole lot of risk there. I think a lot of the other camps that people would self-identify with maybe are a little bit more emotionally charged, but that's honestly where there'd be the most value in figuring out how to collaborate anyways.
Sure. Makes sense.
All right, so that's the book. Then there's a conclusion where he tells a little bit of his story. It sounds kind of interesting. He grew up and was having trouble dealing with the divorce of his parents, was playing a bunch of video games, eating a lot of pizza, and then just decided enough of this. I'm going to change my life, changed his environment, moved somewhere else, came back a couple of years later, and everybody in his hometown basically tried to drag him back to where he was. And I think there's a possibility that you come back home and people are legitimately excited about the change in your life, but I think it's definitely possible that you get the reaction that he got, which is like, oh, you're always going to be this way because this is the way you were when you left. And in that case, can't blame him for getting out of there. A couple other pivotal points when he decided he wanted to write this book. They adopted some foster children, I believe, which is cool. He talks about how this is really, really stressful and I don't know how this is going to happen, but they figure out a way to make it work. And that encourages me, just the conclusion here about his story. Like, these different things that make you uncomfortable, they're not necessarily bad. I have to admit, I was thinking about this when I shared with you before we hit record that since we recorded last time, I have agreed to help coach my son's middle school soccer team. I haven't coached in, it's got to be 15, 20 years. And I knew they needed a coach. Both of them are on the middle school team. One's in 8th grade, one's in 6th grade. So it's kind of a unique opportunity that I can, be with both of them and do something that we all enjoy, have a good time together. But coaching is a big responsibility. And when I heard they were looking for a coach, I'm like, nope, no way. And then Rachel's like, well, why don't you just talk to the coach? He's a pretty easygoing guy. Maybe, you can just help out a little bit here and there. So I talked to him. The very first thing I said is like, okay, so you want to have practices Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I can do Mondays. Thursdays will never work. Fridays will only work about half of the time. If you're still interested, let's talk.
Yeah.
He's like, oh yeah, no problem. So going back to the limiting beliefs, and this is an example of, like I said, I've identified some of these, but I haven't written them all down. That was a limiting belief that I had going into this was, well, they're going to want a coach who's going to be there every single time, and that's not me. So I just shouldn't even bother. But once the conversation was forced upon me, and I basically laid out what I wanted to have happen, and say, I completely understand if you want somebody more committed, and no hard feelings if this just isn't going to work. They're like, no, we'd love to have you. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds for me. I get to be involved on my own terms and not completely blow up our lives and our schedule in the process.
Good job, Mike. Proud of you.
Hey, thanks. Anything else about this book?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. Well, let's talk about action items. I will go first. There is chapter 14, Never Forget Where You Came From, where he talks about this is kind of where he talks about his story and overcoming his environment, switching environments. But he talks about the narratives that families tell about themselves. And he says it's valuable to learn your history and your roots. Just learning about your history doesn't mean you have to repeat it. So I actually bought on Prime Day one of those DNA tests that is supposed to give you like your health analysis, but also your ancestry.
Yep.
And it is sitting in a drawer upstairs. So before the next episode, I am going to take that DNA test and hopefully have the results.
Nice. Fun.
I'm also going, it should be interesting. I also want to, from the Find Unique Collaborators, I want to make a list of who I am collaborating with. And some of this is easy. I'm collaborating with Joe when we do Bookworm. I'm collaborating with David Sparks when we do Focused. But I want to make a list of the people that I am collaborating with or have collaborated with in the past. And the projected takeaway from this is I'm going to recognize I have a little bit bigger network maybe than I thought I did, which would be good for me because I still feel like I don't really have a whole lot of name recognition, and I get nervous about like reaching out to somebody like, oh, they don't know who I am, that sort of thing. But when I sit and think about the people that I've worked with and the stuff that I've been able to make, I'm pretty proud of the results. So just having that list, I think, will be good to go back and look at periodically.
Sure. Yeah.
And then the last one is I want to create a weekly planning template in Obsidian, as we talked about.
I got to get the bell out. One of these days, I'll get it out.
Yeah, you do. All right. What about you?
I have 3 of them here. And I've talked about 2 of them already. So the morning and evening walks piece is one that I've brought out that I've been kind of working towards. The other one was the journaling in the morning piece and possibly the weekly. I'm going to try it this upcoming weekend and just see how that goes. And if it works out great, I'll probably try to continue it. If it doesn't, then I'll abandon it. But do that particular piece. And then one chapter item that we didn't talk about that I have an action item from is there's a section in I think it's the second to last chapter where he's talking about the masterminds collaboration piece, but he also mentions rotating environments. And I know some people do this for work and personal or different types of work that they do. Like they've got a desk that they go to and they write, and then they've got another area they go to for recording video, and they have these different environments that make things easier. And I'm kind of wanting to work out something along those lines where I've got a couple different like base workstations. Some of that's because I've got this IT assistant who works in the same space as my current desk, and I love him. He does a lot of great work, but he just needs to ask questions about everything. So it's like, I love you, Joel,
Sure.
but sometimes I got to go work somewhere else because he'll do fine. He doesn't need my input, but if I'm here, he will ask for it consistently. So haven't got him to stop that part yet. And he knows he does it. He just doesn't realize it until it's like 30 minutes into it. So anyway, I got to find a different area so I can try to do a little bit of a rotating environment setup. So yeah, those three, the morning and evening walks, the journaling in the morning, and then the different workstations. That's what I got.
Nice. That one I like too, the rotating environments. I actually kind of had that as an action item, but have already worked through a schedule where I can go to the co-working space and just break
sure.
up the routine.
Sure. Yeah.
I do think that's a valuable action item though, and that chapter is really good. I agree.
Yep. It's a good one.
All right, so style and rating.
Yes, sir.
My book. So I guess I go first. We talked at the beginning about how this is your standard 3-part book, but it's laid out a little bit differently than what I was expecting, which is a good thing. It also, the headline, the book title is very clickbaity, and so I feel like that tempered my expectations going into it. I sort of chose it with I don't want to say I expected it to be bad, but there was definitely in my mind the possibility that this could go south quickly.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened. I feel like Benjamin Hardy is a very good writer, very entertaining, lots of research being done with this, quoted a lot of the other books that we've read. If I were to nitpick this, I think one thing I would say is that he does what I would probably do if I were to try to write a book, which is quote too many people. I feel like every single chapter he's quoting another book and another source and somebody who said this thing this particular way. And some of the best advice that I got was, you know this stuff, you've been around this stuff long enough, you can make these ideas your own. Doesn't mean you're taking somebody else's idea and you're putting your name on it, but you are synthesizing the idea and you're applying your own spin to it, and you don't feel like you have to give someone else credit for the work that you're doing. And that is inherently ingrained in me. I think I've shared this story before about how when I was a freshman in college, I got in trouble because I cited a source wrong for a book report of all things. It stemmed from a relationship with a professor who really wanted to get me, and I can't say that I blame them. I was a little bit of a jerk in that class. But anyways, like that really stung me. They gave me a 0 on the paper, said they're going to take me to academic court, get me thrown out of school, whatever. I'm like, I didn't plagiarize that paper. It's a book report, for crying out loud. But that stuck with me. And I feel like he kind of takes the same approach in this particular book where, maybe you've heard these things from other places, but you don't need to just regurgitate what Carol Dweck has said and what Ari Meisel has said and all these other people have said. I want to know what you have to say. I want to know what you think about this. So I feel like it could have been a little bit more direct. It could have been a little bit more like just owning this idea. I can totally empathize with not wanting to rip off somebody else's unique idea as your own, though. I think some of that comes from a little bit of a lack of self-confidence. So that's the only thing really I can point out that I wish would have been different about this particular book. I love the descriptions of the environment, determining your actions. I feel like the first section just sets the stage really, really well. I feel like no matter where you are in your productivity journey, you're going to find something out of this. The only other thing I could add about it is that I don't know that there is anything completely life-changing here for us having gone through this. I feel like if we would have sat down and thought about, what does it mean if willpower doesn't work? Well, it means this is true and that is true. We probably could have arrived at a lot of the message that he is putting forth in this book. Doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, but it's not like completely radical either. Once you wrap your head around the title, a lot of this stuff kind of seems a little bit of common sense. the forcing functions and leveraging the sunk cost fallacy and stuff like that. I mean, it's really well done, but it's not one of those books that I'm gonna recommend to everybody that they read this. I'm gonna rate it at 4.0. I do think it's valuable. I think the biggest value it has is in context with other books that we have read, like the Willpower Instinct. I'm not quite sure if I just read this in isolation, if it's going to have the same sort of impact. And I also, when I got done with this book, it wasn't something where it was, I don't know, like mindset specifically, or even something like grit, Man's Search for Meaning. Definitely, you get done and there's almost like an emotional high from reading the book, and you're excited about, I now see the path forward. I don't feel like I got that from this book. I feel like I got a lot of information about environments and some motivational tactics that I could deploy I could deploy carefully in specific situations, but it wasn't the kind of thing that you get done with it and you're like, let's go storm the castle sort of a thing. Not that every
Sure.
book needs to be that way, but just in terms of like the books that we've read for Bookworm and the lasting impact that they have, I'm not sure this one sticks around for a real long time.
Sure. No, that makes sense. It does. It does. Well, I just want to say, like, he started off the book by talking about Viktor Frankl, and I thought, well, that's a pretty solid start to a book. And then shortly after he mentions Frankl, he gets into Carol Dweck, and then Carol Dweck comes up multiple times throughout the book. But there's also a few points in here. You know how sometimes we, downgrade a book because there's a section that we feel like they should have expanded on. It's like, well, yes, but there's a whole other book on that, so they probably didn't need to. And like, we make that comment, I feel like, fairly often. Well, he does have a couple places, at least a handful of places in this book where he's like, if you want to read more about this, go check out these. And I remember whenever we were reading How to Read a Book, that thing keeps coming up. Like, I don't know how that book keeps coming up, but it does.
Yeah.
And it's like, whenever you're choosing what book to read next, like if you were to make the list of books that were recommended or mentioned inside the one you're currently reading and then go read those, like you end up with this massive network of books to read. It seems like a lot of books today don't do that. They do once in a while. They'll mention one or two books, but not like 12 or 15 or 20. This one, there's a lot of books recommended in it, which is kind of a throwback, I feel, to kind of the older way of writing that just isn't done as much today. Now, I think you're absolutely right. He doesn't really own this and pose a whole new thing that's his own idea. He does outsource the credit to a lot of people, which is fine, but I feel like I think you're right. I think he needs to own it to some degree. I think he nailed it. I think it's a 4.0 book. I do. Although I feel like this has potential to be a how to read a book scenario where like this could come up more often in the future, but it just doesn't feel like it will right now, because I feel like this is the type of thing that we've kind of been coming to already. So it doesn't feel groundbreaking to us, but I feel like to somebody who's still trying to figure out how to set their mindset and figure out how to do the self-help concept, this could be a very revolutionary book for them. So to us and for Bookworm, I don't think it fits that, but I think this could be one that I would recommend to people who are fairly new to the space, though. Like, I feel like it could be helpful in that scenario. So anyway, I'll agree with you. 4.0. That's where I'll land on it.
All right.
Cool.
So let's put Willpower Doesn't Work on the shelf. What's coming up next?
Yeah, so next book up is The Mountain Is You by Brianna West, I think is how you say it from what I looked up. And this is about self-sabotage and why we resist efforts to change. And as I've talked to some folks about the concept of self-sabotage, I'm learning that pretty much everybody does this. So we're going to talk about sabotaging yourself and stopping you from setting up your environment to do things the way you think you should do, or that you want to do. So there you go. The Mountain is You, Brianna West. And then, what's the one you're going to pick, Mike?
So I have to give you some context for the selection of this book. I mentioned liminal thinking when we decided we were going to read that one. When you picked that one, I told it to my mastermind group, and there was one person in particular who was very, very excited about that book.
Yep.
And there are a couple other books that he has recommended since then, which are kind of all along the same vein. This guy reads more books than we do put together. So this, I feel like, is a creative perspective on using liminal thinking. I am going to choose another recommendation from that person, The Art of the Idea by John Hunt. How it can change your life. It's an illustrated edition, it says. It's a hardcover, though it's not really a hardcover. It's kind of a funky cardboard cover. But it looks like a really neat looking book, and my hope is that this will build off of the liminal thinking foundation and kind of put a creative spin on it.
Cool. Sounds fun. Super exciting.
Indeed.
All right. Got a Gap book?
I do not. And I think I already know the answer about you, Gap books.
Barely got through this one. I finished it this morning. Like, that's talk about forcing functions. That was definitely necessary, for sure. So thanks for having Bookworm in existence. That way I can keep reading in crazy times like this.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for putting up with our technical difficulties today. Thank you for supporting the show by downloading and listening to it. Thank you specifically to our Bookworm Club premium members who have chosen to support the show financially and are willing to give us a couple bucks a month. It really means a lot to us. If you decide to do that, you can go to club.bookworm.fm/membership to join. And when you do, you get a couple of goodies. You get a wallpaper that I designed. You get access to the MindNote files from the books that I read. There's some Gap Book episodes that Joe had recorded a while back, and a special section on the club specifically for the premium members. So thank you to everybody who has supported the show in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. And if you want to become somebody who is an avid reader, the first thing you need to do is change your environment. And you need to buy The Mountain is You and put it on your kitchen table and read it over breakfast tomorrow, okay? That's your task. That's what I'm going to give it for you, okay? And then we'll cover that in a couple weeks, all right? And I expect you to be back here again. All right. Thanks, team.
All right.
Kind of ended that one different. Didn't really plan on that, but it happened.
Are you good with that?
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Okay.
Buy
cool.
all the books. That's the answer. I know
Buy
you got to
all the
run. So
I do. Man, what a day.
oh, happy day. All right. Anything you want to tell the world before we say bye?
I apologize for all my technical issues. Looks like my internet's back online now, but I wasn't gonna.
Don't risk it.
Yeah.
It's fair. All right.
Do we need to pick a new recording time so everybody knows?
We can. Yep. So that would be the 13th.
That works for me.
Okay. Bookworm recording.
Okie dokie.
2:00.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. You heard it here, folks. August 13th, 2:00 Central. We'll see you then. All right. Bye, all. See you next time.